Okay, everybody, we're going to start. We've only got 1 hour. Okay, this session is about free schools, myth and reality. My name's Mark Taylor. I'm an assistant head teacher in a South London comprehensive. I'm also London convener of the Institute of Ideas Education Forum. If you see anything or hear anything that you like, we meet on a monthly basis if you want to take things forward. We're not anticipating we could solve every issue on this topic today or any other educational topic, more raising questions that we can continue discussing later. We've got 4 very good speakers today. I'm going to introduce them in the order in which they're speaking. First, Tom Burkard. He's a research fellow at the Centre for Policy Studies. He's on my far left. He's also at the University of Derby as a visiting professor of education policy, and in this topic he was a proposer for the Phoenix School, which was rejected by the Department for Education. At the time, I remember when I kept putting on the Today programme in the morning, and Tom's progress seemed to be mockingly tracked by the Today programme, and then in the end it looked like you were disappointed, but you perhaps should explain something about our process today. Then second speaker is Michael Shaw, who's deputy editor of the Times Educational Supplement, who are one of the sponsors of this strand. Michael said he doesn't mind if I mention again that one of his claims to fame is he originated the phrase happy slapping, which we actually discussed last year in a session on violence in schools. You can see we've moved on now. But it's nevertheless one of those phrases that stay in people's minds. Michael's got a really good insight into what's going on educationally in general, and so he's going to take his own approach to the question of free schools. Then we have Pavan Dhaliwal, who is from the Head of Public Affairs at the British Humanist Association, and we know she's got some strong views on the question of free schools, what they mean, and I think possibly what they imply for the people or groups that are setting them up. And finally, David Perks, who is Principal Designate for the East London Science School. He's just released his prospectus here, so it's available, I believe. He's also the author of What is Science Education For? He's connected a lot to changes in the national curriculum, and he's met members of the government about that. But principally today, I suspect he'll be referring to his free school, which he's got the go-ahead from the DFE, so different stories from members of the panel. Okay, so without any further ado, off we go, starting with Tom.
Okay. Over the last generation, successive governments have buried our schools in an avalanche of initiatives and directives. Now, education is arguably the most grotesquely overmanaged activity in England. To illustrate, Berkshire Hathaway, which is Warren Buffett's investment firm, has total assets of £250 billion. That's enough to pay off the Greek national debt or to run England's schools for 4 years. Their central office in Omaha is staffed by 24 employees, probably no more than the number of senior managers in one of our comprehensive schools. These teams are responsible for ensuring that their school has policies to cover every conceivable eventuality. They must create the illusion that these policies are working and that targets are being met. Unsurprisingly, this control freakery has robbed most teachers of the ability to think and act for themselves. The free school program is an honorable attempt to break through this intellectual sclerosis and empower those who hear a different drummer. Alas, it hasn't worked this way. Free schools are free to employ unqualified teachers and heads, free to abandon the national curriculum, and free from local authority control. These are meaningful exemptions, but relatively few applicants have taken full advantage of them. In any case, there is still a vast body of policy which demands compliance. Unless you have current management experience in one of England's maintained schools, you are unlikely to understand exactly what will satisfy the DFE and Ofsted. You will not know the best ways to pretend that your teachers have the time and energy to offer a bespoke education to each pupil. There have been a handful of successful applicants, such as the West London Free School and the East London Science Academy, who have broken free from the comfort zone of the national curriculum. Most have not. There are only so many people like Dave Perks, who has emerged from the system with his intellectual faculties intact. At a workshop sponsored by the New Schools Network, every speaker used the lobotomized educational jargon found on official websites. The idea for the Phoenix Free School of Oldham originated from my experience as a lowly corporal in the Territorial Army. I had complete freedom to design and deliver map reading and signals exercises for 2-week training camps. Never once in 7 years as an instructor did anyone tell me how to do my job. In the military, decision-making is devolved to the lowest level possible. Individuals, and not committees, are responsible for decisions. This was the ideal behind our plans to start a free school where all the teachers would be former service personnel. The Phoenix Project attracted an enormous amount of attention and even support in the media. Recruiting pupils in Oldham proved no problem. Both white and Asian parents were eager for a school where grown-ups didn't have hang-ups about discipline. Although I had 25 years experience in education, 3 as a teacher in a comprehensive school, we were not quite prepared for the elaborate quadrille devised by the DFE to discourage outsiders from starting a free school. Our application to open in 2013 was rejected. We have since had talks with a sympathetic insider who has agreed to teach us the steps to this strange dance, and I am confident we will open in 2014. Were free schools merely the first step in a program to free schools from state control, I would support it wholeheartedly. I share Chris Woodhead's vision of, I quote, schools funded by, but otherwise independent of the state, free to decide their own admissions policy and to define their own individual ethos, competing with one another in the marketplace. Like Chris, I have no hope that this will happen unless there is a revolution in the way we think about education. There is very little sign of this happening. In the press and in Westminster, there are far too many people who think that free schools and academies programs are game changers. They are not. In one sense, they are a step backward. In effect, they merely transfer power from local authorities to Whitehall. And this has its downside. Under the old system, if one local education authority didn't like your ideas, there were still another 149 that might. But as patronage is being drawn into the center, your options are closing off. Under another education secretary like Ed Balls, they might disappear altogether.
Thank you very much, Tom. Very kept time excellently. Michael.
Oh, thank you for having me back. I suppose I'm here representing the press, which is in large part to blame for the spread of the myths about free schools. These myths have come from both the supporters and the critics, and for the sake of balance, I'm going to try and lay into both. The left-wing press has portrayed the supporters of free schools as pushy middle-class parents who want to keep little Jemima away from the local kids and in their own boutique version of private education. Meanwhile, the more dominant conservative press has portrayed the critics all as lefty, socialist worker-waving teachers, enemies of promise who want to drag children down to the same level. Even the more sober analyses have summed it up as a struggle between plucky parents and the education establishment. But that's not really the reality. Of the 103 free schools opening next year in September 2013, around 60% are being set up by teacher-led groups. Indeed, teacher-led groups are the most growing supporters of the free school movement. We have 2 great examples in here of former educationists like Tom and David, who are incredibly experienced before getting into this. And when you look at the free schools that are open already, many of them are already backed by the big existing chains. So we have one EACT free school, 2 ARC free schools, one run by the Future Schools Trust, one run by the Dixon City Academy Trust, the Charles and Company, and so on. Many other free schools are spin-offs of existing schools, such as Perry Beaches in Birmingham. So we start actually narrowing down to try and find which of the free schools are being set up by amateurs. It's very hard to see. Even schools like the West London Free School was incredibly canny about getting very experienced educationists onto its committee at the start. So the main point I think I'm going to make is that free schools aren't as different from existing schools as either their supporters or critics would like to claim. And I'm going to attack one main boast in favour of free schools and one of the main criticisms. And the boast is that somehow free schools are more free, and as Tom's already hinted at, that doesn't seem to be the case. Back in the 1920s, 30s and 40s, if you read the TES then, you'd have seen lots of references to free schools. But those are talking about schools such as Summerhill, set up by A.S. Neal, schools that were actually quite radical in the way they broke away from the curriculum and the education system. The new free schools, with some possible exceptions, don't seem to be like that. They, like the academies, have the freedom to break away from the national curriculum. But when I visited a lot of academies, and many of the worst examples of Stepford schools you see in the academy chains, some of the worst examples of the Tescoisation of the school system, schools with the same behaviour policies, pushing people through the same hoops to do the same exams and the same league table measures. the press has lapped up the idea that free schools will be different, they will break the mould. They've picked the example of the West London Free School. I think Toby Young is a fantastic advocate for that movement. I wish there was a Toby Young for early years or for FE and for other sort of less sexy areas of education. But the journalists reporting on the West London Free School keep saying, oh, this is a school with uniforms and CAD systems and competitive sports and Latin, and try and make out this is unusual, where anyone who's written about education will know the vast majority of secondary schools have uniforms. House systems have been popular throughout secondary schools since the mid-noughties and 90s. And as for Latin, 3 years ago, the number of pupils in state schools doing Latin overtook the number in private schools. So it's not quite as unusual as people still make out. I could bang on about some of these other things for a while. I'll switch on the criticisms of free schools, which is that they'll open the floodgates to private companies and to strange religious groups. Now, there is a debate to be had about the creeping privatisation of education, but I'm not sure free schools can get blamed for that when you realise that it was Labour who allowed Turing Grove to be run by a private company, Edison, for 3 years. And indeed, Ed Balls went far beyond Michael Gove when he allowed pupil referral units to be run for a profit. Similarly, when it comes to religious groups, I think I'm going to agree a lot with what Helen has to say, as an atheist with concerns about faith in the education system. But there are already thousands of faith schools. We also have academies run by creationist car dealers. We have 2 state-funded Steiner schools. I know this is going to annoy Dr. Richard House when I mention it, but some of their beliefs are very strange indeed if we start looking into them. And we also have a number of independent schools that are subsidised by the state, including the Greenfields Education Trust. And if you've not come across the Greenfield Education Trust, it runs Greenfield School in East Grinstead, which is for 4 to 18-year-olds, and teaches on the principles of L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology. I spent a day there. They have giant pictures of John Travolta and Tom Cruise when you first arrive. It's a very, very curious school. All these schools currently exist in the system. I think that'll be my general point, that although there are changes in the way these schools are created, and they do create opportunities for innovative teachers like those on our panel, the overall story is perhaps not as big a change. And of course, you won't read that in the press because we just like writing about what's new.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Pavan.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to begin by saying that the British Humanist Association, we campaign for a secular state, and we want to bring an end to all faith schools, but in the absence of that happening, we campaign for a more inclusive faith school sector. We're not actually opposed to free schools per se, but what we have done is identified problems within the system in relation to religious free schools, which, if continued, could exacerbate religious discrimination within the system. So one area is diversity. So there's been a wider diversity of religious schools opening as free schools than there ever was in the maintained sector, and this includes evangelical and pseudo-scientific schools. So, for example, there were 33 religious free schools approved to open in 2013, and these include the first ever religious special and alternative provision schools, including Greek Orthodox schools, A Church of England, evangelical Christian, Sikh, Jewish, Muslim, and the first ever multi-faith stroke spiritual school, which promotes faith in general. Now, the reason that these groups are attracted to the free school system is the extra freedoms, which I'll discuss in brief. And also, they don't have to contribute any money, and obviously these groups are going to be poorer than the established Church of England and Catholic school systems. In relation to curriculum, so they're not having to follow the national curriculum or locally agreed religious education syllabus, which is a problem for us because we do support good religious education teaching. All teach sex education beyond the importance of marriage. Now, maintained schools must follow the national curriculum and also teach about anatomy, puberty, reproduction, and STIs, which we think is important. Now, in terms of admissions, free schools can only discriminate to up to 50%, which is actually progress in our eyes because a lot of schools can discriminate to 100%, and it's one of the reasons why the Catholic Education Service is not too keen on free schools, because they have to follow the 50% rule. Now, in theory that sounds good, but in practice what we found is that some free schools are actually using the other 50% and they're going to feeder schools which discriminate 100%. So in effect, they still have 100% within their school. These schools can also fully discriminate in terms of employment using genuine occupational requirements, and within the maintained sector, religious schools can only traditionally discriminate to a fifth of its staff. Now, one of the biggest problems we've found in this area are processes and the process issues with the Department for Education. And this is the levels of scrutiny the schools are subjected to, and also the DFE's very secretive process when approving schools. So with maintained schools, bids would have to be publicised throughout the local authority, but now religious groups can build sufficient evidence of demand just within its own faith group. And in theory, they're supposed to show evidence of demand from outside of this group, but this hasn't been quantified, and the DFE don't have or publish figures on these. And so it means that there isn't as much scrutiny paid to these schools in the way that it works within the maintained system. So a good example of the insufficient scrutiny is that there's a number of schools that we have focused on, particularly schools which wish to teach creationism. One of them was Grindon Hall. Now, the Department for Education, when we met them, were unaware of Grindon Hall's creation policy document, which was up on its website, in which they state that they will teach creation as a scientific theory. Now, until the British Humanist Association brought this to the attention of the Department for Education, and this was simply by doing a Google search, they were unaware of this. And this was 9 months after the DFE had actually approved to open it as a state school, and it opened actually this September. The whole process of the free schools applicants is secretive, and no one knows who's applying until they're actually approved. Names of failed applicants are never published, and this makes it really difficult for the public to engage with the process, or more importantly, to even trust it. In June 2011, we put in a Freedom of Information request of proposed free schools with their faith to the Department for Education, and this was actually rejected. We appealed to the Information Commissioner's Office, who in July 2012 ruled in favour of disclosure, and the Department for Education are now appealing the Information Commissioner's Office, and we're now waiting the judge's decision. And the last thing I will say is pseudoscience. So we led a really big campaign, Teach Evolution, Not Creationism, and the government actually followed our suggestion of amending the Free Schools Model Funding Agreement to say that no school can preclude in any subject the teaching as an evidence-based view or theory, or any view or theory that is contrary to established scientific and or historical evidence and explanations. So i.e. banning creationism. This doesn't apply to academies, and also it doesn't apply to assemblies. But since then, the government's gone on to approve 3 Christian free schools, which don't intend to teach creationism, but wish to do so. And this is quite a ludicrous position.
Okay, so finally, Dave, it's starting to sound a bit weird, Dave. I don't know what you were going to say, but the whole thing's sounding a bit like a conspiracy so far.
I think one way of looking at this is to step back from the sort of issues of which free schools get approved and on what basis. And to sort of think about where this is in terms of how we appreciate education, full stop. And the way I kind of sort of play around with this idea is how we relate to the state is at the core of how we understand the position of free schools, and how we relate to the idea that the state running the education system and how it does that. And I think there's a lot of confusion about this, because there are different sides on the argument who claim different things about what the state should or is doing. And if you do that, then it gives you a chance to sort of examine it sort of from one step removed, so to speak, and I think we come up with some different answers. But nevertheless, one thing that is true is that if there's one thing the coalition have done that's got any resonance whatsoever in the public, then free schools are in. If you actually go to one of the meetings that are run either by the New Schools Network or by the DFE in the late stages of the application process, you cannot be but kind of shocked at the number of ordinary people who are committing themselves to doing what is an arduous and unforgiving task of trying to set up a new school. And you do have to ask yourself the question, why are they doing this? Somehow it's caught on. There's a sense that this is a way of giving ordinary people, from whatever perspective, whether it's from a religious community or an ethnic group or whatever it is, or teachers who've got an idea about how they want to teach, it's given them a sense that there's a stake in education that there wasn't before. And I think that is really worth examining a little bit. Because if you look at why people come at this, then they come at it from a multitude of different reasons. As I've already said, the local community idea. We want a school for our community, our church, effectively, if it's a small primary school. Or we want a school to allow the idealism of a particular teacher to have a voice. Or if you're Michael Gove, it's because maybe, put it crudely, he doesn't like the unions and this is a way of getting back at them. So however you look at it, but the unintended consequences that you've got something that people see as a way of having more of a stake in the education system, more of a stake in determining what kind of education is put forward. I know, Michael said, well, it may or may not be the case. That's how far schools are free, so it's Tom. But there's definitely people think that that's something in it. But the way you might look at it is it's like different people trying to claim resources off the state for the education they want. This is a way of finding a chance to get the education that you require for your children in your community, or however you understand that. And for once, it's possible. Because what happened in the previous administration for 15 odd years is the idea of an alternative to what was being dictated from the centralised system that existed under Labour was just not even conceivable that anybody could do anything outside the box. Everything was dictated, centralised to an enormous extent. The experiment that Tony Blair brought in with his education ideas was that somehow the state could reconfigure education, drive standards up, bring in the target-led model which had already existed, but bring it in a more and more centralised way. And push education forwards. But at the latter stages of that government, they realised they couldn't, and it failed. Okay, so in that sense, where are we going? Well, the way I would see it is that the critics of this would say, well, no, we want local schools for local communities, and this is going to detract from that, and that's pretty much the argument that you hear. But that's also a claim on the state for people in their own community where they've already got a stake in a good school, which, by the way, isn't the same thing as saying everybody in that school has the same opportunity, the same experience. They don't. Middle-class kids have a different life in the school, a normal comprehensive school, than other kids. And that's what's being claimed for, not the idea that we all are in it together. At least that's my perspective. So where does it lead me? The reason I thought that this was an opportunity I could not forego is because there is a space that's been created by this debate about education. Whether it's right or wrong that it's about structures is not the point. The point is it creates a space where new ideas can be tried out by, for me, a teacher with a lot of experience in education, to try and see what we can do, what we can achieve. And that is the exciting thing about this. Yes, you will get a few crackpots with this system who may then go to the wall as they fail to achieve it. But I'm telling you now, they will have to go through a very arduous process, and I'm sure Tom will explain, to actually get to open the door. We're still not there, we're on the way. So if we do get there, then hopefully you might see at least one or two examples of something worthwhile in the education system.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, I'm very keen to go out to the audience. Can I see who's got questions? Right, so I'm just going to say a couple of things before we go on. I might ask you something. Just in case you're not clear, this is Andrew Adonis's book, Education, Education, Education. This is the man we should really be talking about. He says, conceptually and legally, free schools are just independent state schools which do not replace an existing state school or schools. Okay, they are actually academies. Okay, so a free school is an academy, in case you're not clear. It's just not an academy that's been a conversion from a state school. So he was attempting to say in this book, because he pushed it, the system was basically rubbish. There were too many comprehensive schools that were unaccountable, and as one tool of increasing the accountability of the system, he led on academies. That has now led further to free schools coming along as a kind of self-standing academy, such as the government defines it. The basic point is that the current educational system, state schools, don't do what they're supposed to do. But what I'm getting from the panel, this is what I'm going to check before I go out, is that from Tom you're saying they're not a game changer. You'll think it's an opportunity, take it. The states, even though it's difficult, why not have a go? Confirm or deny in a minute. Michael, it's not that different. John Travolta posters are up, and some of the weird examples. I'm sure that wasn't just a drama production, you know, where they do it in Greece or something, but it's not that different. Pavan is saying it's, again, I think not that different, but there are some secretive policies involved, so you're suspicious. Dave, I think you're saying it's about the relationship to the state, and the state's backing down. You know, the state is saying, if Andrew Adonis is the state, we can't do it, so we want somebody else to come in and have a go. And into that space, there's an opportunity. Can you just confirm or deny very, very briefly that I'm kind of capturing it, and then we'll go to the audience?
I would say that I definitely agree with Dave in the sense that it is creating a space. We would have obviously gone to the immense amount of trouble that we went to try and start a free school if we didn't believe it was creating a space. Our argument is, but I do agree very much with Mike, that the net result is that the vast majority of the applicants are really not that different from what's out there already. They are being started by teachers, they are being started by academy chains, and the ones who, like, as you said, Toby Young, was clever enough to take on board consultants, which unfortunately we couldn't afford.
Okay, thank you. Michael?
I think you summed up my argument exactly. But the one thing I would add about the freedoms is that you have a series of schools that have been allowed not to follow the national curriculum. It then becomes a bit of a nonsense when all their secondary schools have to teach the three same exams offered by the same boards, both GCSE and A-level.
Yeah.
Because that's going to limit what they're doing anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Pavan?
Yeah, I would say that not so much that it's just secretive, but actually I find that the system with the Department for Education is quite shambolic, and we're actually having to lead them in many ways and identify problems which they weren't aware of because their scrutiny processes are not good enough in the first place.
Okay, and Dave?
I just think that, yes, this is an opportunity, but it does tell you something about the state's relationship to education as a whole. And that, I agree with you very much about the idea of withdrawal. And I think, but then do you then say, no, it must go back? Back to what? And I think it's when you question it in that way, you start to realise, well, how do we go forward? And so, in a sense, we don't really have much choice. So, let's see what we can do.
Okay, so hands up please if you want to speak. The session is called Myth or Reality on Free Schools. So if you want to push the panel more to explain, please do so. For example, I want to know if this guy is going to examine everybody according to the GCSEs that we already have. Are you going to do something different? How are you going to do that? But that's my question. We need to see what the audience thinks. So, where's the mic, please? Okay, we'll start at the back. Hand up there, and then we'll come to, then the second person is also quite near the back, then we'll come forward. Okay.
Thanks, Mark. I've got no doubt at all that Dave's school is going to be an excellent school, and I would send my kids there without a shadow of a doubt. But what it seems to me is happening is we're getting the creation of a National Education Service, an NES. And I think I'm reasonably relaxed about that. I mean, Gove's an accountable politician, and that seems to be what's going on, so we'll shift from the local to the national. Where I feel less comfortable about it is that I think it's based on an act of political cowardice on the part of the Tories. So it seems fairly clear that they want to challenge the educational left in unions, in teacher training, and in local education authorities. And I believe they should be challenged as well for their attack on knowledge. But I think that needs to be that debate needs to be had out in the open. And I think that will generate new ideas, not managerialism.
Okay, and then I think there was, just over that side, there's a hand up. Yeah, then we'll come forward. Yeah.
I'm quite naive about the free school system. I don't know a lot about it.
I think we all are a bit naive about it, so.
But I'm interested in when it comes down to things like educational statements and educational welfare services, is how are these brought into these schools and how are they managed? And is it going to lead to privatisation of these sorts of things within these school systems, or will they have to meet the same needs as those of the
Yeah. So will it lead to commissioning services that were previously taken care of by local authorities? Yeah. And then coming forward, there's a gentleman there.
Yeah, my question is, should we be judging free schools on the basis of who it is putting forward for free schools, or just on the idea of free schools in general? So I can see that you know, David is a teacher of science who's got a lot of experience in that and passion for science. I can see him setting up a free school as being a good idea and something that you might want to buy into. I live in Newcastle upon Tyne, and Newcastle College was, which has a particular reputation for the way in which it deals with its staff and the way in which it kind of relates to other educational establishments, including other colleges and other schools. Newcastle College put in for a free school and didn't get it, and personally I was quite pleased that they didn't get it. Is that just my kind of personal opinion of Newcastle College, being an ex-employee of Newcastle College? So should we be judging free schools, just in general about being a good thing, or is it down to, who's actually going to put them forward, like whether it's educational professional, yeah, or whether it's a big organisation?
Okay, then come forward, please, and we've got 4 hands up. Yeah.
I don't actually know anything about education. I'm just a citizen. I've been to school, and my son's been to school. I welcome free schools because, despite the fact that there are brilliant teachers and fantastic schools, the comprehensive system has failed because it doesn't look after the people I think it should look after. And I'm particularly sensitive to the way that children from poorer homes, intelligent children from poorer homes, are cared for. I mean, the great fortune of my life is that I happened to be 11 in 1945. So I got to Cambridge in 1953. And my father left school at 12. I welcome free schools. Anything which is introduced, which gets us free of what we had before, is a good idea. But what I would like to ask the panel is, where do we go from here? How is it that the good ideas that are developed in these free schools get more widely spread?
Thank you. And yeah.
Instinctively, I feel very attracted towards the idea that free schools will offer a stake in education to ordinary people, and that it will open up a space where education can be independent from the state. So I feel very attracted towards those 2 ideas. However, I have a couple of concerns as well. The first thing is that, as a parent, there's an element of luck whether you have a free school in your area or not. And as much as I might like my children to go to David's school, the fact that we live an hour and a half away is going to make it completely impossible. So I will be completely open to whatever happens in my area. I mean, so the question that comes from that then is setting up free schools a compact actually from really transforming the state school sector that's on offer to everyone, whilst free schools may be wonderful in their place. If you can't get to them, I'll be not looking at changing the schools that are actually available to everyone. The second concern that I have is, does the idea that ordinary people can have a stake in education, does it not just reinforce the idea that education is something that everyone knows something about and everyone can kind of meddle in and have an opinion on, and that kind of further reduces the status of teachers in society and the specific skills and knowledge that teachers might have acquired, in the same way that we see how parents feel free to go into schools nowadays and dictate what happens to their children? Do we not just reinforce those ideas?
Okay, there's 2 more here. Yeah, and then we're going to take the panel, then I'm going to come back to the hands that are up next time. Yeah.
Thanks. There's a precedent for free schools in the US in the introduction of charter schools 10 to 20 years ago. The debate over there, as I understand it, has taken 2 sides. The first is about what happens when you introduce competition and privatisation into education, and that's been a reference point for a lot of people over here trying to understand what's going on. And this other side is about the educational philosophy, so broadly whether you believe in skills-based learning or knowledge-based learning. And here's where the US and the UK differ, because as I understand it, in the US the charter schools introduced skills-based learning, whereas over here a lot of the free schools are reacting against it. So I think that demonstrates that those two sides are independent, but the problem I have is that they often seem to be treated over here as if they're the same. And one of the frustrating things I find is that when you try and have a conversation with someone about the philosophy of free schools, you get an argument about the competitive aspect of, coming back at you. So what I'm trying to get at, is that about confusion, or are people hiding behind behind the competitive argument?
Thank you. And over here. And there's the other mic somewhere back there. Can you come to this lady here so that when we go back out, she's the first one to ask a question? Just here, walk down, yeah, hands up, hands up. Okay.
Okay, well, there's always one. This is a crackpot view from the
This crackpot is a senior lecturer at University of Manchester.
Don't worry, no, I don't need that. I just want to be judged on the content of all I say. I think there's lots of old kind of political divisions that are much less clear than they used to be. I very much come from the political left, find myself in horror, finding myself agreeing on this with Chris Woodhead. That's quite a difficult position for me to find myself in, but nonetheless, that is where I am. I think there's something very, very dangerous that's being spoken here. And it's something about these phrases like established scientific thinking and evidence-based education. Now, as soon as the state becomes involved in defining what is true, legitimate science, we are in big trouble. I'll just point you back to Galileo, the Inquisition, etc., etc. Science is always being overthrown all the time. Thomas Kuhn wrote an enormously important book 50 years ago called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. One thing he said in that book was, when the existing scientific paradigm is about to shift, the existing ones run around like headless chickens trying to impose and to reinforce the existing system, rather than having an openness to the possibility that the kind of metaphysical worldview that currently prevails might just be wrong. And as soon as the state starts trying to specify what is correct science and what is not, we're in a very dangerous area indeed.
Okay, we're going to go reverse order speakers, so Dave, Pavan, Michael, and then Tom, and then back out to the audience. We have 20 minutes left, so please, everybody, panel and audience, keep your comments and questions very brief.
Okay, there's so much flying around, it's difficult to know what to do with it. A couple of things. Yes, there are problems with the idea of free schools per se as a solution to the situation of education as we find it. You can see that because it's kind of a piecemeal approach to something that, if you believe that the state is going to solve it, you'd want a much more rigorous and far-going approach. But hang on a minute. Just take a deep breath and think, well, actually, that's what's been tried for the past however long, okay? And it's got more and more centralised, more and more dictatorial, in the sense that this is the right answer, evidence-based. I agree with you entirely, what you just said. The evidence base is brought in to tell you how to teach. Every single thing you do as a teacher is now dictated in that sense. And actually what the break that, whether you like Michael Gove or not, the break that the coalition did was say, hang on a minute, let's snap this overbearing relationship between the state and education and sort of open it up a bit. They don't know what they're doing, right? It's fairly obvious, right? But they're saying, we don't know what we're doing. So, does anyone? That's the question. And as soon as you say that question, there should be a debate. So I agree with Toby that we need a debate, definitely about what we're doing in schools and how we do it. And actually, over the past couple of years, the space is beginning to open up where that might actually happen. And we hope, in putting forward this school, given that we get to open the door, that it will provoke a response and will provoke even more debate. And so one reason for doing this is, one, to give kids we get a damn good education, but to show actually you can give kids a damn good education and see what happens.
The first point I wanted to address was actually this lady was saying here, and I've been working within policy for about 8-9 years, and it's interesting because education policy is one that I focused on from the beginning, but it's the one policy area out of all of the ones, health, criminal justice, whatever, that it seems to be the case that with every minister that comes in, they think, well, do you know what? I went to school, I know what to do here, and they overhaul the complete system based upon the fact that they went to school, and it's like me saying, well, I've been to hospital once for an operation. I know what needs to be done for the entire NHS. And so it's sometimes quite disheartening in a meeting with policymakers and ministers who have education experts around the table, and all that they're interested in is for you to be there to pick holes in the previous system so they can use that for political point scoring. I think that's a terrible thing, and I think that education should be one of the highest priorities, and it should be led by someone who's an expert in this area. I think we can only really assess down the line, obviously, the success of these schools, but I think there are risks of things being socially divisive in the way that they do with religious schools, and also socially selective. And one of the criticisms I know of Dean is the fact that you have middle-class parents who have the time and the knowledge to navigate the system of free school proposals and go through it, whereas sometimes that might not then be filtered down to the areas which actually need really good, well-led schools as well. In terms of the evidence-based thinking, I object to the fact that there are pseudo-scientific schools opening under the free school system. I oppose the fact that Steiner schools have been given approval who only have homeopathy within their school, and Maharishi schools which teach the science of creative intelligence. These are state-funded schools, and I don't think there's a place for pseudoscience within the state school sector, or any sector really, but if you want to pay for it, then obviously you're free to send your children wherever.
Thank you. Michael? I was going to answer the question right at the back to the left about education and welfare services, which is one of those areas I think has been overlooked in the last 5 years. And when I've spoken to education and welfare officers, they are worried at the moment. And it's not particularly about free schools, actually. It's more to do with disintegration of local authorities, the rise of academies. And it's the logistical fact that they don't know who they should be talking to. They don't know who they once they don't have a local authority officer they can speak to. Now do they go to the chain, do they go to the individual school? There's a great deal of confusion out there, and that needs to be addressed. On the question about parents and putting the public in charge of schools, one of my worries is actually we'll have a lot of parents who are very disappointed. It's a bit like Labour saying they had a policy of choice for parents. It was never choice over schools. It was always preference. You could put down a preference. The same thing here, there's no power to set up a free school, you have a power to apply to set up a free school. And I worry that those who then don't get through will follow their arms and think, well, what can I do about this? Well, there are all sorts of things. You can become a governor. It's much easier to transform a school that's already there, that's already been built. You can do that much more quickly than starting from scratch and setting up a new school. I know some might disagree with that. And finally, on the question about the philosophy of free schools, I think one of the great things for free schools will be if they don't have a single philosophy, the more variety, the better. I think the fact in the charter schools in America, some of the first ones that were set up were actually by the American Federation of Teachers. It was the teacher unions doing it, which entirely debunks one of the American myths, at least. Thank you.
Right. I think that I certainly agree with the notion of diversity, not in the usual sense, but in the sense that, say, for instance, if you take Somerville School you mentioned earlier, that was, I think, probably about 10 years ago, Ofsted was trying to shut them down. Now, I don't particularly agree with the teaching philosophy at Somerville, even though I can think there's probably a lot worse things in the world. But on the other hand, I was absolutely appalled that Ofsted were trying to shut them down. Because if I think back about the people that I have run into who have taught me something, either in schools or in life in general, they are the most diverse lot of people you can possibly imagine. They've had difference in personality, teaching style, everything you can imagine. The one thing that united them was, shall we say, the belief that they had something worth conveying to you and the passion and the ability to convey it. I don't think this is anything that the state can possibly specify and nail down. And I really think that if you think about it realistically, if you go back before 1986 when Ken Baker started the intensive interference that his been going on in schools with new directives coming out with appalling regularity. If you go back much before that, schools had an incredible amount of freedom. The only reason why it fell apart was because of the fact that parents had no ability to opt out of schools like the Tyndall School, which became highly ideological. And I think this is one of the things where the free school program could potentially set things right, is by giving parents enough of freedom so that they can actually opt out of schools that they don't like, and also to give teachers the freedom to follow their consciences as opposed to the dictates of the state. I do not share Pavan's faith that there is a right way to do things. I do not share her faith that there is such a thing as a clear division between science and pseudoscience. And certainly, after what you said, you took away almost everything I had to say, so I'm going to shut up now.
Okay, we've got 15 minutes, so hands up, and we're going to try and get everybody in. Probably only one more response from the panel. Let's see. So the lady here who's got the mic, I believe.
Hi. I just wanted to ask what the panel thought the effect of free schools was going to be on higher education, whether it was going to prepare students who might be being failed by the current educational system to be prepared for higher education, university or employment.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Then, right, so the gentleman with the red, there's a lady behind you. Is that a lady or not? I'm sorry, I can't see.
I'm a lady.
Ah, okay.
My name's Edward.
I'm a modern teacher.
I just want to come back to something that Pavan and David said. It's kind of linked where Pavan said free schools are just going to be in these, very nice sheltered middle class areas, because if your stepdad's a bidman like mine, he's not going to have time to run around and set up a free school. And David mentioned, well, what do we go back to? Now, I don't agree. Comprehensives at the moment are awful because we have catchment areas, and if you live in a poor area, it doesn't matter how clever you are, you will go to the worst school because you are poor. Houses cost 70% more in nice catchment areas. My question is, instead of having selection by luck, if you've got the nice middle class free school, or selection by wealth and comprehensives, why don't we go back to selection by ability and have grammar schools across the country?
Yeah.
I think that would work.
Okay, and although I said I think the guy with the red, I think there's a guy behind you there. You've had your hand up in the first round. Which one? He's not, his hand's gone down. Okay, yes. You.
Sorry. So, I mean, basically, I was listening to the debate, and actually, it's a debate I've been having with people online, especially on Facebook and stuff, especially with regards to, types of free schools. And I have to say, that if I had a child and stuff, then I most definitely would not send my child to a free school. From all that I can gather with regards to free schools, and again, I'm not supposed to talk about any particular individual school, it seems to me that there's no credible evidence that they do actually raise country standards. It seems to me that this is more to do with taking schools out of the state. It seems to me that if that's the case, then people should be upfront and honest about it, rather than using this thing about wanting to improve education. It seems to me that the latter is just a kind of figure to hide basically what seems to be an anti-state movement and stuff.
Okay, so we're going to the gentleman with red sleeve. Then we're going to come, there's 4 people here, and then we'll try and get everybody in on that side.
My question is primarily to Dave, and follows on from the last couple of questions really. I don't think I've heard enough from Dave about what his school offers that's different. I understand your argument about freedom to take control, and that's a significant thing, but maybe Dave could just say a little bit more about why his school is being launched, because it's not being done elsewhere. Thank you.
Yep.
I wonder if the panel, is that right? I wonder if the panel could just say something about what it is about state schools that's wrong with them. What are the failures that the free school movement should be addressing?
Yep. Forward to the gentleman in front of you.
What is it that actually determines the quality of education across the country? Is it, as the free school agenda would suggest, schools having individual control and lots of different approaches, and somehow that's supposed to, the best ones are supposed to then become dominant? it's not really clear how? Or is it actually, when you look at the countries with the best educational results, like Finland, they've got virtually no private sector, so you have much more equity of access, whereas free schools are making access more unequal because you have more middle class schools. And they also have very high level resources, so they have smaller class sizes, more textbooks, more computers, more science labs, more language systems and whatever.
Okay, thank you. And here?
Let's be honest, you can draw a clear line in the sand between actual science and creationism or homeopathy.
Okay.
Just the question which was raised earlier about evidence for free schools working. After Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, the regional government decided to try to start education over it because they had an average SAT score of 45. And they decided to adopt the charter school method and went from 47th in America to within the top 15. So there is an element that actually grades do improve with this, but isn't there surely something more about education, an intangible element, learning for learning's sake? And surely parents can see this, and so shouldn't we let parents choose and let everyone have free schools and let everything be free for the sake of everyone?
Okay, and I think, is there somebody behind?
So it's very much the same topic as a lot of the questioners have addressed already, and that's content. Everybody's talking about the form of school and whether it should be free or academy or state. But surely the question is, if people have such a desire to set up, parents have such a desire to set up all these new schools, then the problem is surely with the content of what is being taught. Surely we should be addressing of what kind of knowledge do we wish to be taught in current time.
Okay, thank you. So we've got 2 or 3 questions at the back now.
Yeah, Dave mentioned how the relationship between government and schools can be stifling at times. But I was wondering what the panel had to say about the decline of the middle tier in education as schools have moved into becoming academies, LEAs and local authorities for education, diminishing. Obviously that's kind of a mixed blessing insofar as you don't have anyone over your shoulder, even though also it's more difficult to work with other schools without that.
Okay, and then forward there's somebody at the front of that block, 2 people, and then we'll come here finally for this, anybody in this area.
So it's quite something I've never really picked up on, but if I understand it correctly, then free schools are kind of a quick fix solution because the government doesn't understand what it's doing. But I don't know, I would just want to, whatever happened to the idea of having a universal education of everyone, no matter what ability they are, what catchment area they live in, how much money their parents have, of having an education in the languages, humanities, sciences, rather than just having a diverse set of free schools that are just for some people.
Okay, what happened to the ideal of education for all? Okay.
Yes, well I suppose following on from that, because I really do think I welcome the opportunity that free schools present to have a much bigger discussion about what kind of education system we want, because I tend to agree with Dave. I think that our old education system is disintegrated and we have to actually face that fact. The question I have though is sort of really how free are free schools? To what extent are they constrained still by certain kind of like laws and regulations about how we treat children, what kind of education they're expected to have in terms of sort of like preparations for employment, all of those kind of things. How free really are they? How the 2 people who've tried to set up preschools, or if it's trying to set up particularly, how far do you find yourself being limited by bureaucracy or being free of it through this process?
Thank you. Right, there's 3 or 4 people here. You have got 30 seconds only each because we've got to finish it on time.
Right. Okay. My question. Sorry.
Go ahead.
My question is that we talked about the content, but what about the quality of teachers? Because that seems to make the biggest difference. Is how good a teacher is. Do free schools attract very, very good teachers away from the state school education where they might be frustrated?
Thank you. Very brief. Good.
Yes, an assumption that seems to be occurring, or recurring actually in the audience, is that free schools will be associated with groups of middle-class people getting the middle-class schools that they want. You can join a charity. I'm on a board of a charity. We set up 2 free schools. We've specifically targeted very poor areas. If people in this audience are worried about it, come to us or set up another charity and let's set up some really good schools in really poor areas.
Okay, just the panel, I'm going to go back in the original order when I come back to you, okay?
Yeah, just a quick one. I mean, I'm really worried about the disintegration of state education, but I'm also worried about what sort of phoenix is going to rise out of the ashes. And I have to say that sometimes those charities that are set into certain areas for poor, actually just have a perception of what those children, those poor children need, rather than some sort of more universal project that's already been mentioned about what a good education is.
Thank you. One here, and then over here.
Thank you. I would like the panel to consider the morality of free schools, because ultimately you taking it as an opportunity that cannot be left aside. And actually, when I'm in a state school facing redundancies, I cannot but see it that you putting my money away.
Okay, and over here's somebody. Yeah.
Just a quick comment. Someone suggested maybe we should return to grammar schools to give pupils from poorer backgrounds a chance to access a certain type of education, a certain quality of education. Having worked in a grammar school, I saw it mainly populated by pupils whose parents could afford to give them extensive tuition for the 11 plus. So I don't think the modern grammar school is quite the same as maybe what it was.
Okay. You want to come back quickly?
Sorry to keep on banging on about this, but I haven't said anything more important here as well. So as far as I'm concerned, it's distinction between pseudoscience and science. Go back 5 or 6 centuries, Galileo was tortured by people in the day who were claiming that he was spouting pseudoscience. And there's examples of this throughout the history of science. So you're on very dangerous ground when you are taking it upon yourself to define what is pseudoscience and what isn't.
Okay, we cannot resolve this. We hope you're interested. If it started you thinking in a way that's different, which I hope, then please come along to the Education Forum discussions where we can work this out, which I think is probably the key issue for me, is if people stop talking about league tables, the government's all got it in for them, and saying, okay, what can I do personally? That might be for me the thing that's coming out of this, which I like. Okay, that's my final thing. Back to Tom.
Okay, taking up on the one thing about the bureaucracy involved, yes, there's a lot that doesn't come out of the DFE in terms of like employment law and everything. There's a fantastic amount of bureaucracy that free schools still have to comply with, and I think that the whole cult of controlling everything in this country is one thing that does have to be addressed. But getting to the question, I think it really does exercise a lot of people as to whether free schools are just essentially for middle-class children. I don't think this is true. It certainly isn't true in terms of what Dave's planning on doing. It certainly isn't true in terms of what we are planning on doing. As a matter of fact, the thing that is the most revolutionary about the Phoenix proposal is that a very substantial part of our teaching staff, not the ones who will be teaching academic subjects, but the ones who will be in charge of pastoral care, athletics, basic skills teaching, everything, will be former servicemen who are being mostly retired NCOs, people who come from a background where they know that the kids that are doing from Oldham are the same background they come from. They treat them with respect. They don't treat them with the sort of contempt that you get from Frank Chalk when he goes on and on about what can you do with these kids and these terrible parents. And this is, I think, the big difference between what the concept of free schools being a middle class scam and what really is happening with a lot of people who are trying to start free schools.
Thank you very much, Tom. Michael.
I'm picking up on the issue of the gap between advantaged and disadvantaged pupils and their backgrounds. It's almost too early to say. At the moment we've got conflicting figures. The Department for Education keeps pointing out that half the free schools are in the 30% most deprived areas, whereas analysis by the Guardian and others within FOI say they actually got a disproportionate number of middle class families. Hopefully organisations like yours and others will help make sure they are balanced in the future. I'd love to get into the debate over whether homeopathy is pseudoscience, it is. And also the selection debate. I've commissioned we ran a series of pieces on great myths in education in the CES last year, and one of them was looking at selection. It's online, it's highly recommended. And finally, on the middle tier, which came up earlier, that is the curious situation we're in now, where we seem to have lots of organisations that suddenly have clusters of about 20 schools that are in different parts of the country. And they're thinking, well, perhaps if we had them all together in one space, there would be economies of scale, and there'd be ideas we could share, and maybe we could call these local education authorities or something. So we have to be careful we don't go that way.
Thank you.
I have to stand by saying that no doubt there will be some free schools that do fantastically well, and I think that the concern remains that there are, this gives smaller fringe religious groups and pseudo-scientific groups more of an opportunity to open schools and send their children to schools which segregate them off from other kids whose parents don't share the same belief system as them. So I agree that there should be a good universal education system, and it should be good emotionally secular system as well.
Okay, just before Dave, to let you know that the next session is the plenary in the theatre on level 1, I believe, or might be -1. That's on freedom, which is over to Dave.
Okay. Some really good questions here. There's no way to sum it all up. But one or two things that struck me: content. You're really right. What matters is the content of the education you deliver. And if the free school system, or whatever it is going to work, then it has to deliver better content, more knowledge transmitted to young people than was done previously. Because the one thing you knew under the old way of doing things under the last administration was that content was being stripped out of education systematically. And the thing that has come out of this movement, if you want to call it that, is that there's an attempt to try and put that back into education. And that's something I really celebrate. If you want to find out about my school, you can pick up the brochure and have a look and talk to us. And if you really want to teach there, talk to me as well, and I'll give you a chance to do that maybe as well. So, but you know, it's an experiment, definitely, but it's one that is predicated on the idea that we believe in education, that we can educate in every young child. So the point about grammar schools, they didn't work because they selected a very small minority, and they were based on a premise of elitism. Our school is in trouble with its local authority already because we don't have selection, and they do. So you just have to ask yourself the question, are state schools, the things you think they are? I don't think so. So we are not having selection. We're going to let anyone through the door to get the education we offer, and we're not going to bend to pressure to give them a soft education. There you go.
Thank you very much.